Welcome to Paranormal M, the place where every shadow holds a story. Subscribe and enable notifications so you never miss out on our hauntingly good content. Get ready for a chilling adventure. Girlfriend and I had our dreams hijacked and shared a nightmare. Basically, I had a dream that I was in my room. I was having sex with a girlfriend. She's always reluctant to have anal sex. This is relevant, I'm sorry, and didn't know the story was going to start out like this. So anyway. So she was crawling away. Oh geez. So she was crawling away on all fours, playfully escaping me, trying to have anal sex with her. Suddenly, though, my dream was hijacked. Suddenly, 3 cats appeared in our room. Oh no. A bunch of objects moved on their own. This is when the dream's vividness and lucidity became enhanced, and very raw and unnerving. Wow. I pointed to a decoration hanging on the wall. I was like, look, it's moving on its own. My girlfriend was then sitting in a chair next to the bed. She was feeling very uncomfortable. Yeah. That's when the pillow on her bed sort of sunk, like somebody placed their head on it. I yelled, look! And as we stared, the rest of her spot on the bed sunk down. We wanted to leave the bedroom, so we opened the door, and right outside of our bedroom was my aunt for some reason. Then the carpet in front of us depressed like something was standing on it. Then the carpet turned into white linen. It raised up and started engulfing my aunt while she cried for help. I wanted to move forward, but my body was paralyzed, and it felt like my real body was paralyzed for some reason too. But when I was paralyzed, I was shown just a still vision of my living room window with the blinds up. I was looking down at my sunny lawn. Then I snapped back to my aunt being sucked down into the linen, and the linen then falling to the floor in a pile. That was while I could still hear my aunt's muffled cries for help. I ran to her and I yelled, give her back, let her go. I reached for the linen, lots of dust particles blew around me, and then my body went paralyzed again. I was shown the same exact still vision of my sunny yard. This time I really struggled to move so I could save my aunt. Then it felt like I was forced or like shoved out of my dream. Felt like I was being a nuisance, so I was like ejected from it. So I woke up in a jolt. It was jarring. Man, my hands are shaking writing this. That's when I woke up. It was raining and thundering, which was unsettling. Then my girlfriend made a noise in her sleep. Took my attention, so I was listening closely. Then she screamed some gibberish and woke up frantically. I guess that gibberish was actually, go away, but in Hmong. She said her dream took place in the same location. First our bedroom and then our living room. She said that while her dream was going, an entity showed in like an upside down of our living room window. The same one that I kept being forced to look at when I was paralyzed. She said it looked like a female body, but it was totally black. It was like a shadow, but it had large butterfly wings. She said it was sort of beautiful in a way, but it was also terrifying because it had red glowing eyes. After some talking, she said that her dream started out pretty sexual as well. Then later in the day, she told me it was me trying to have anal sex with her. When she said that, my heart sunk because, well, the more details I heard, the more similar our dreams were. The similarities really made us uncomfortable. The dream was extremely vivid. She was very shaken up and thought it was strange. Strange how we both woke up in the same 30 seconds from a similar nightmare regarding evil entities involving the same window in our living room. She often dreams in more of, like, her own family's house rather than our house. She's really groggy this morning because she was afraid to go to sleep last night. It's because she was so scared. So I don't know if this is paranormal, but there's just so many similarities that we felt it wasn't a coincidence. We both have been on edge since it happened. It doesn't help that another storm hit last night, and now we have hail damage in both of our cars. But anyways, that's what we're dealing with at the moment, and we're weirded out. Well, that was an interesting first story. Visiting Grandma in the Cemetery. My maternal grandmother died in May of 2017. That was after suffering with heart problems for about a year. My family and I visited her at the hospital when she fainted. She never regained consciousness and was on life support for the final day of her life. I don't know her that well, and I really wasn't that close to her. A few weeks after her death, I dreamt of her. She messaged me in the dream. It was in a language I didn't understand. The words looked like they were upside down or even backwards. I was in a garden. I was receiving her messages through texts and like a very large tablet or phone. This is how we last communicated when she was alive. I only ever spoke to her through the phone. In December of 2017, we visited her at her gravesite. We went in the day and noticed a Christmas tree inside the chapel. My mom immediately wanted to buy an ornament for the tree since you could add the name of the person buried at the cemetery and their birth date. However, we had other things to see and do as my grandmother's buried in a cemetery 3 hours away from our home. We were touring the city she lived in. That was as my mom lived there as a teenager. We went back at night close to 9 p.m. My sister drove us there, and there was pretty much 8 of us in the car. In the day, we met 2 office ladies and spoke to them for a while. It was windy and rainy at night, and I remember feeling incredibly freaked out. I didn't want to be there any longer. I saw my mom and my sister go into the chapel and put the ornament in the tree. After they came out, the door shut behind them. In the car, we're all freaked out, but figured it was the wind. My mom and sister went to say their last goodbyes to my grandmother. As they walked back to the car, I noticed that an office lady was walking with them. She was conversing with them and laughing. She waved her goodbyes and walked away. My mom and sister got in the car, made a comment about the weather, and I asked, "Why was the office lady here?" They turned around to me with shocked looks on their faces and told me, "What office lady?" True story, haunted house. My grandma's around 75 years of age. She lives alone and prefers to be a recluse. The house she's lived in has been the subject of discussion for many moons. Creepy stories, supernatural stuff, and that sort of stuff has always been exchanged during family gatherings. My mother and her siblings had tried to get her out of the house and move in with us many times, but to no avail. She simply likes to be left alone. So at this point, I'm around 15 years old. My father never let me or my siblings stay away for longer than a day. We saw our grandma at least once a month because my dad enjoys long drives. But we always return by nightfall. So my grandma always complains that she never gets time with us because of all the other cousins that are staying with her during the summer. That's mostly because they live nearby, and hence have stories about the house. So, when I turned 15, my dad had an epiphany. He says it'll be good for me and my younger siblings to stay with my grandma for a few days. Now, the stories that we have heard are kinda scary, so my younger sister, who's afraid of the dark, wasn't looking forward to it that much. But I convinced her it was all fake and that if the house was haunted, my grandma would have been able to live in it for that long, and well, she's not completely convinced, but she does agree. On the other hand, I was really looking forward to it. I had all the freedom to call my friends at night and nobody would say anything. When it comes to ghosts, I simply don't believe they existed. I come from a family of strong theists. I believe in a God who would protect me, and that blind belief rendered me sort of oblivious to supernatural demons and whatnot. So my sister and I go to her place. Now there are 3 bedrooms in the whole house, One is where my grandma sleeps, which has 2 beds. One is where my grandpa used to sleep, and one is known to be the most haunted room of all of them, by the way. My grandpa's room had his stuff on the bed, so my choices were to sleep in grandma's room or the haunted room. I picked the haunted one easily. Not because I was brave, but because it was private and I could talk to my friends at night. My sister said that she would sleep with my grandma. The first day was fine. I didn't get much sleep that night. In fact, I slept early in the morning because it was impossible for me to sleep in that room for whatever reason. Now, the thing about that room is the windows are all wooden, so not even a bit of light would get in. Not in the morning, nor at night. The third day, my sister says that she's going to start sleeping with me because my grandma apparently had a creepy habit of walking around the house in the middle of the night. I know, that's a definite red flag. So for the 4th day, which is the day of the main incident, my sister and I are together in bed. It's around 2. I hear the pendulum clock ringing through the house. I know my grandma's up because I hear shuffling outside the room. My sister's asleep behind me. It was pitch dark in the room and I wasn't particularly afraid. I was just randomly thinking about stuff about my teenage drama. I'm facing upwards looking into the dark and one of the hands is hanging out of the bed above my head. Our bed didn't have a headboard, but had sort of a wood covering on the top and the bottom. So I'm in my own head, and my train of thought gets broken by something hitting behind my bed, like somebody knocked on it once. I freeze and my mind's erasing, so I think it was me. My hand still hanging back, I must have jerked it unconsciously. So I stay like that, aware of my hand still hanging back. My sister's still sleeping beside me. A few seconds later again, a huge knock, this time a bit more loudly and strongly. Now guys, at this point, I'm officially scared. Slowly pull my hands down and it was pitch dark. Couldn't get a single word out of my mouth to call my sister. Pull my hands down and I touch my sister's hand and I squeeze it. And this is no joke. My sister jerks herself away, doesn't even ask me what's wrong. Starts chanting mantras my dad taught us. Well, I wind up joining her, and a few seconds later, a lighter knock behind the bed. This time, both of us hear it. We hug each other, too scared to do anything, and continue praying. When dawn broke and my grandma was officially awake, we switched on the light and checked the entire room for rats or holes that rats can come into. Nothing. There's nothing behind the bed or beneath it. My grandma was a clean freak. There'll never be a rat in the house anyways. I go back to bed and I just fall asleep. We don't say anything to anyone. We called our parents to bring us back, but they weren't home and my dad told us to buck up. We continued to live in that house and that room for about a month. In fact, we barely got out of the room. I don't even know why. By the end of the month, we got attached to the room and the house. A lot of creepy and scary things followed that week, but Dad did say to buck up, so we bucked up. We went back home after about a month, told my mom about, everything that had happened. It was after I left that room in that house that I realized I felt lighter doing so. My aunts, after hearing her story, screamed at my mom for letting us stay there so long. Apparently, Uncle went crazy in that room. He shut off all the ventilators and made sure no light came in and locked himself in the room for months. My family had to sign him into an asylum. It took years of recovery to get him out of his own head. And after that, we never stayed there alone. But that said, my sister and I stopped being afraid of the house after a whole month. When we go back there, it's sort of a welcoming vibe. It's like we made peace with the contents of the house, whatever it was. But I'll never forget what happened that month. If you want to hear more about what happened, let me know. Abandoned school ghosts. This story happened in my hometown. I think when I was about 8 or 9 years old. My hometown's very small, though there are multiple neighborhoods and occasional abandoned houses left to rot. At that time, I didn't really know much of the town history, but I did know of an old building that was called, well, our town's name and then school. Like, the old town name school. And that was by my classmates and teachers. But anyways, one day I was walking to school, and since the abandoned building was on my way, I took a glance at it. In one of the windows of the house, I saw a pure white curtain. It was flapping around because of the wind. Behind the curtain were 3 elderly women. They seemed to be having a conversation before looking down from the window at me, making eye contact. I still have a very vivid memory of the look on one of the women's faces. A face of confusion. Quickly broke eye contact and continued walking to school. I don't remember what happened that day except for that strange experience. I don't know what I saw that day, if it really happened and if I'm supposed to see it. For all I know, it could have been a dream, but the only people I've told about this experience were my mom and my friend. My mom said that I saw ghosts, like a past student of the school. But other than that, she just laughed it off. My friend, on the other hand, was creeped out by the story, so also telling me that I probably saw ghosts. And for extra information, there is no reason for people to be entering the building, and there's no accessible entrance that I know of. The area around the building's all covered with weeds, vines, and bushes. All windows and doors are boarded up with wood, and nobody investigates the building's area. My first and only experience. I do Civil War reenacting, and I'm often at original forts to do this. One I did in February of this year was in Texas, and it's at an original Civil War fort. It was occupied by the Buffalo Soldiers. This reenactment took place over an incredibly cold weekend with freezing temperatures and sleet. It was fully immersive. Nothing post-1865 was allowed. We were representing new Confederate recruits tasked with keeping the fort, and the extension and the frontier safe. We did everything as they would have, from drills to food, and this we have guard duty. That takes place from 11 to about 6 p.m. Each man was assigned a 1-hour time span during which he had to watch the horses, make sure that nobody stole them. Spend the rest of the hour awake and aware. We stayed in an original building that had long since fallen down. My watch was at 2, and I quickly checked the horses and hunkered down. About 20 minutes in, I heard some voices in the distance, probably 50 or 100 yards away if I had to guess. But any time I tried to focus on them, they'd disappear. I questioned it, but I largely ignored it. A couple of minutes later, I heard somebody approaching where I was. It was being obvious since the area around the building was stone. We had like hobnails in our shoes. Then I heard them step into the room I was in. It had been established earlier that anybody who would, fall asleep would be punished. People had already faced corporal punishment for infractions, so I quickly turned to what I expected to be my CO. No one was there. Left the room, looked around, but couldn't find anyone. Went back and waited for my hour to be up, and all the while I was hearing these steps and voices. Got my replacement, went to sleep. The next morning I got talking with others. Without me really saying anything, I had somebody ask whether they heard voices during the night. And as we're discussing this, another fellow comes up and tells us, "Did y'all hear anything weird last night?" I had about everybody who was there correlate my experience independently of one another. Everything from voices to footsteps, spurs. This place was pretty isolated. No one else was up, and everybody had, nearly the exact same story. I'm not sure what it was. I've never had a paranormal experience before or since, but it left me rattled. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we were representing Confederate soldiers. The fort had housed Buffalo Soldiers, some of which had been murdered while they were there. If any spirit would have a reason to get pissed at us, that would be the one. Yeah, I might agree with you. I was not sleeping alone that night. It was 2010. I was still very young, scared of the dark and unnatural from the early age. Like most people, I was deeply curious of these things. The house we owned at the time was quite big. Only a singular floor, but it had this really long corridor, maybe 15 meters throughout the entire house. The layout of the house was quite peculiar. The kids' room was on one side, with the kitchen and living room being in the middle and my parents' room being on the opposite end. One night as I was drifting off to bed, I felt uneasy going to sleep alone. My parents don't mind me coming into their room to sleep, as they know I was, in the dark and just wanted to get some sleep at night. The procedure of sprinting down the hallway was nothing new to me, terrified me to primal levels, but I could feel safe after I was snuggled in my parents' bed. My parents' bed was big and pretty comfortable. It was quite high off the ground too, so it wasn't an uncommon place to go, during hide and seek. The sound of the carpet while crawling under it forever stuck with me just because of how distinctive it is. I laid silently in my parents' bed. I was content, and I was safe. After about 5 minutes of laying in that bed, that sound, it was there. I heard 4 or 5 drags of someone or something quite heavy under there. Then nothing. My siblings were all asleep. There were no pets in the house, just my family and whatever was under that bed. I tucked my head under the blankets, silently sobbed, terrified, waiting for the morning to come. I did actually get some sleep, but I'll never forget what I heard that night. Home invasion or something else? This actually happened 4 years ago. So my dad passed away. It was completely sudden. He seemed healthy. At the time, I was a senior in high school, so I had to take some time off to calm myself and be with my mom. I'm an only child, by the way. 2-ish weeks after the funeral, my mom and I decided to head out and take a walk. If I remember correctly, it was the first time I got out of the house. After the funeral, of course. I was really depressed due to his passing, so around 12 p.m. I decided that I have had enough interaction with the world for the day. Told my mom I'll head home first. She gave me her keys, said she'll go to the bakery and come home after. So I reach her house. I notice that our outdoor light is on. Well, that wouldn't have been weird if it was on when we left, but it wasn't. Not me nor my mom turned it on, and the switch is inside the house, so no one could just turn it on from outside. And I mean, it was 12 p.m. We left at 10 p.m. There's no need for the light to be on. Still, I shrugged it off and opened the door. A very weird feeling when I went inside. Can't really explain it, but I just felt anxious about something. Anyway, at first I didn't notice anything weird around her house. That was until I went in my mom's room. And oh my God, was it a mess. The light was on in here as well. Had some books on a chair there, and they were all scattered onto the floor. Some travel bags and suitcases. They were all in the closet. They were all just chilling on the floor in the bathroom. Or rather in the bedroom, front of the bathroom. The closet was closed. The drawers from my mom's dresser were open, and some of the stuff she kept in there, they were scattered on the floor. Some picture in my room as well, cupboards open, books scattered across the floor. Heck, even my mom's pillow was in my room. Some figures I had on my desk were rearranged. I guess they didn't like my decor, and well, that's pretty much it. I went to check the living room and saw that only some cupboards were open and some drawers. I was really surprised that they were actually, because, well, somebody would need lots of strength to open these specific drawers. It was almost always impossible to open them all the way, and they were pretty old and difficult to open. But somebody did just that. So I did what every normal person would do. Stayed there, started to clean up, checked every inch of the house. It's a small house, but nothing, absolutely nothing was missing. My wallet, some cash, my mom, and they were all there. Our laptops were there, my phone was still charging, nothing was missing. Even the door outside was locked when I got home. I checked the attic and nothing. Checked outside, nothing. Nobody could have broken into our house. There were no signs that somebody did. I even checked for any hidden cameras, and I watch a lot of crime shows. The drawers in the living room gave me hell. Still don't get how somebody managed to open them all that way. I managed to clean everything up before my mom arrived, and during this time I was cleaning, I still had that weird feeling. Now, some people have told me that when somebody who's recently passed away, you may still feel their presence around you. Well, my mom and dad, they didn't live together. I lived with each of them separately. And the feeling I had didn't make me feel good or safe or any of that. It just made me extremely anxious. When my mom came home, I explained what had happened and asked if she had left any lights on or gave anyone the keys to her house. She said she didn't. Even today, I don't know what happened back then. I even thought that an earthquake had happened and I just didn't realize it. But aside from the bedrooms and those drawers in the living room, the other rooms are perfectly fine. Nothing out of place. But anyway, that's the story. Sorry for the long post, or if it doesn't really belong here, but I really wanted to share this experience that I had. My experiences growing up. When I was about 5 years old, my parents purchased their first house. It was located about an hour from Los Angeles. It's at the edge of Ventura County in California. I would describe the area as a suburban paradise, but it wasn't always paradise living there. There were a few events that stood out to me over the years. I can't say for sure when these happened. Up until about recently, I tried to forget about all this. But I can't. So here it is. The first event I can remember, I remember pretty specifically, it was Christmas Eve. I was at an age that there was still a magical feeling about the holiday, so I would say between 6 and 8. I remember waking up in the middle of the night feeling very excited. I knew I couldn't open the presents under the tree yet, so I meant to just go and have a look at what was to come. I remember getting out of bed and looking down the hallway that led to the living room. That was where the tree was. You couldn't really see the tree from the hallway. It was more to the left than you could really see from there. You could see where the dining room table is, and one of those chairs was a dark figure. I remember it was very tall. Couldn't make out any features really. It was oddly human-shaped, but I couldn't make out arms or legs. Just what appeared to be a head and 4 glowing red eyes. 4 of them. From years of trying to block this memory, I can't remember if it was 4 on one head or 2 separate heads with 2 eyes on each. But I do remember there being 4 eyes, and they were seemingly all looking directly at me. When I saw this, I just darted back, went directly to my parents' room across the hall and woke them. I explained what I saw quietly as I didn't want the entity to hear me. My parents, half asleep, assured me it was a dream. I knew this wasn't true and that they weren't going to do anything, so I got on the ground and started crawling back to my room. I remember pausing in the hallway and looking back where the figure stood, and there was nothing. It was gone. I didn't dare go investigate further, and I never saw this since. And throughout the years, not much has happened. Sometimes it sounded like somebody called your name, but when you asked everyone else in the house, they'd say they didn't do it. It seemed to happen often, mostly to my mom. Never thought much of it. Well, that was it for about years and years, and later I learned that my father also had an experience. He said he woke up the night for a glass of water, started out in the hallway and witnessed a see-through figure. He simply said it was a large figure that could sort of see through, like a mist. He said he shrugged it off as a dream later, but in that moment it freaked him out. Years later, actually 2 years ago, the activity definitely escalated. At the time, I had adopted a new hobby. I'd work at it in the garage late at night. Every time I worked in there, it felt like something was watching me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Never actually saw or heard anything, but somehow I never really felt like I was alone in there. The house creaked a lot. It always had, but it seemed to be doing it way more than normal at the time. It only added to my paranoia. Oftentimes I'd see shadows in my peripheral vision, especially looking down the hallway at night. Remember one time I was sitting on the couch in the living room laying down looking at the phone, and I saw a shadow in the shape of a hand reaching toward me through the corner of my eye. When I looked directly at it, it slowly slithered away. It seemed so surreal that I didn't even know what to think or how to react. Kinda just sat there, stunned. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of an entity being in the house. It consumed me. As things got worse, one night I was looking down at the trash in the wastebasket in the bathroom. It was moving in kind of an odd fashion. When I noticed this, I went straight to bed to sleep. But breathing was happening right next to me. I shut my eyes tight, did not dare to open them. Felt frozen in fear. This lasted about a full minute. When I opened my eyes and looked, nothing was there. Things seemed to fall all the time with no explanation. I would say a few months of this fear went by without taking any action. One of my friends had mentioned in the past that he'd heard strange noises at night. He then soon became really religious, never spoke of it again. Asked him what happened and he said Jesus made it better. I decided I'd join the church and get help with my problem. I spoke to the pastor about what was going on. He instructed me on blessing the house with anointed oil. He blessed some oil, gave me a prayer, went to work. I was instructed to pray over the house, go over all the windows and doors with the oil while praying. At first, this didn't seem to work. I was told it may take a few times. I would bless the house once a week at first, but things seemingly got worse. I was instructed to say, in the name of Jesus, leave this place. And every time I thought something was going on, one time I saw a strange light dancing around in the living room. At first, I was looking for reasonable explanations, like passing cars. No, couldn't be. Too constant. So I said, "Be gone in the name of Jesus," and it stopped. But in that exact moment, I heard a noise like something fell. I shrugged it off. The next day, we found out the fridge's water filtration system broke and was leaking everywhere. Soon after, I heard a scratching noise in the wall. I was overcome with fear, so I said it again. "Be gone in the name of Jesus." And again, it immediately stopped. The next day, we found out the bathroom lights no longer worked as well as the hallway lights. And later after that, I had an electrician test it. They said a line must have been cut for the part. It must have been a rat. Thought that was odd. Then my dreams started to be affected. One night I had a dream that the devil was speaking to me through a hole in the ground in the ruins where my house once stood. He was trying to convince me to stop following Jesus, and oddly enough, my dream was being convinced. Sometimes I'd be awakened to animal noises. Usually sounded like a growling dog. I had a cat in the house, but it never made a sound like that. It sounded close by, like almost as if it was in another room, not outside. My mother told me one night she was half asleep, opened her eyes to see a large dark figure. The next day she asked me if I went into her room. She thought it was me. It wasn't. She said that it looked like it was more faded, and eventually you couldn't see it. Another night I was awoken to a very, very loud screeching. This time it was too loud for me to ignore. Rushed out of bed to investigate, and of course, like usual, there was nothing. I woke everybody up and asked if they had heard it, and of course no. But as far as reasonable explanations go for that one, I remember seeing multiple owls in the backyard when I took out the trash earlier that night. And it did sound like an owl screech. It was just unreasonably loud. Last time I remember anything strange is, I was having a haunted house dream. And in the dream there's activity, and once I said it, "Be gone in the name of Jesus," in the dream it ended. I woke up to hear a strange whimpering noise, like a whimpering dog. And again, something I doubt my cat could even do. After that, I blessed the house every day for a while, and eventually my fear faded. There was really nothing ever again suggesting there was anything out of the ordinary. Flash forward a few years. Nothing happened. But it looked, I was looking through my Facebook archived messages. There was a bunch of messages I received I never saw somehow. Most interestingly, there was a guy who messaged me claiming that he used to live in that house. I thought that was really odd at first, like, How could he have known I lived there? Well, I googled my address and my family's name just comes up, so that settles that. So I responded to him in his original message, and he was asking if I noticed anything about the house, or if it was all just his crazy family. This message was sitting in my inbox for years, it seemed. Thought if I responded now, there'd be no way I'd get a response. But I did. He basically confirmed my suspicion. He said his family was the first family in that house. And it was strange and activity even back then. He told me his brother once saw a woman in the closet. Sometimes they'd hear talking with no explanation. And it wasn't just them. Apparently neighbors had stories too. It's a town with Native American history. My only explanation at this point is maybe when they were building they didn't realize something must have been nearby. There's a park nearby too that's rumored to be haunted. Sleep paralysis or just a bad dream? This just happened. I'm wide awake and a bit freaked out. So just to preface this, I'm staying in Vegas at a popular downtown hotel. So basically I don't know if I was dreaming or not. Pretty sure I was, because after this I felt like I woke up. I was laying in bed and it sounded like somebody was using the bathroom, which is to my left and closed. I hear the door close and loud footsteps walking toward the foot of the bed. Then it feels like someone is climbing into the bed onto me. My head starts feeling very strange. I don't know how to describe it, but I got the feeling it was trying to enter me. I don't know, it was like the feeling I got. But whatever it was on top of my chest. I was struggling and couldn't speak fully, and I was trying desperately to wake up my wife. I could still use my right arm, which I could use to nudge her, but she didn't wake. During this, I'm trying to speak, but I can't fully speak. It was like I could mumble a word out here and there, but it was a fight. When I would look where it would be on top of me, there was nothing. There was just blankets. As if they were like up and over it, but the entity didn't reveal itself. I'm not sure how this concluded, like I said, but it felt like I woke up. There are details about the room during the event that make me think it was a dream. I think things are different, but I don't know if it was a separate dream or not. Before coming here, I was reading reviews about this hotel and a woman had a similar experience. It sounded like she was sure it really happened. But after reading that, I rebooked my room in a different tower. So yeah, I've never in my life had sleep paralysis. And the more I think about it, the more it sounds like sleep paralysis, but this is weird for sure. My wife just woke up saying she had a dream where we were running and something was chasing us, but we couldn't see it. But earlier, said that, well, I was just laying there. I don't know what to think right now. I'm supposed to be here in 2 more nights and we're considering leaving, but we think we're going to give it another night. Second time's the charm. My brother's room. The family that lived in my childhood home prior to us, they had a boy named Jack. Jack grew up to be a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He fought in the Korean War where he was KIA. My siblings and I were adopted from Korea. We grew up in this house knowing that a boy who lived here before us had died fighting for our countries. Our main source of information was our elderly neighbor lady. So we really knew it was just, well, that his name was Jack, his last name, and that his plane had supposedly been shot down over Busan. In '99, my little brother was adopted. His name's John, but we all call him Jack. My mom would often insist, like JFK. Though I often thought he was named after Jack in the House, and my parents both denied this to be the case. At some point in the early 2000s, the surviving members of the previous family were in town and stopped by our house. They were curious about how it looked and wanted to reminisce about their childhood memories. They were introducing us to kids and my mother and my brother Jack. They commented that it was sort of neat that there is another Jack in the house, and my parents clarified that his name is technically John. We learned that the previous quote-unquote Jack had also been a John. He and my brother also share a middle name, though with different spellings. Think along the lines of Stephen with a V or Stephen with a PH. Weird coincidence, right? Well, the coincidences don't stop there. My brother's bedroom had also been the late Jack's room. Contrary to what my family's always believed, we had thought that my room had been his, but my Personnn-born brother's room was decorated in airplane theme at the time, adding a little cherry on top of the whole bizarre coincidence Sunday. At least if you recall what we were told by the neighbor lady regarding Jack's alleged death. Recently I did some digging. I've come to discover that, based upon Jack's division in the Army, he wouldn't have likely been flying planes at all. In fact, his date of death and the time frame suggested by the division's movements places him somewhere around the Personnn perimeter, but not perhaps within Personnn proper. Even without that perfect level of synchronicity, we're still left with the odd happenstance of my brother sharing the same first and middle names of the bedroom of a man who grew up in the house before us. And for more of the speculative paranormal edition, my brother grew up having night terrors, and by his teenage years, at which point my sister and I had moved out to go to college, he ceased to sleep in his bedroom entirely. He set up shop in the spare bedroom in the basement. Though he's very tight-lipped about anything that he may or may not have occurred or seen in that house, he is terrified of ghosts and the supernatural. He hates to stay at that house alone, and he and my dad both claim that they've heard laughter and conversation coming from the room where the previous family used to listen to the radio. My dad finds this faint chatter comforting, kind of neat. My brother feels essentially the exact opposite. I've not really encountered anything, but I really just wanted, something to prompt me to write all this because, well, came home after a few days out and my brother's bedroom light was on. My dad never comes upstairs. When I asked him about it, he actually immediately suggested I'd left it on or somebody had broken in. When I left the house last week, I had to use my phone's flashlight to navigate. That's because I left so early in the morning that it was still dark out. This also isn't the first time I've come home to find his bedroom light on. Trying to tell myself it's maybe just a wiring problem, but I'm not going to pretend I don't have an absolute heart attack when I see it on when I don't know or anybody's been there in days or even weeks. I think I astral traveled and saw suicide. I was in high school when this happened. I've never had another experience like it. It was the most vivid dream I've ever had. Also, the only dream where my perspective was above the scene, so to speak, rather than inside of it. I was in a house and it was very dark. I don't have a body, but it didn't seem odd to me at the time. I didn't recognize the house and I'd never been there before. I was in the living room looking around. Wooden floors, red drapes, fireplace, doorway to the left, all the lights were off. I could still see inside from street lamps outside. I noticed there was a body of an old man hanging from the ceiling. He was hanging from a cord. He was clearly deceased. I'd never seen this man before. I was staring at him and didn't notice anybody enter the room. A grown man screamed, "Dad!" It startled me so much that I snapped awake. It felt so real. It was like the scream was right next to me. My ears were still ringing from the noise. Walked around the house to see if anybody was awake. Maybe the noise was my family or a TV or something. But only my mom was awake. It was really late, like maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. She groggily looked at me and asked what I was doing. I asked if she heard a noise. She said no. I'm confused and just tried to brush it off, but I had a really bad feeling about my grandfather. I decided I would call my dad the next day, just to be sure. Came home from school and called him first thing. Said he was fine and asked about my grandfather. He said my grandfather was fine too, and I sighed in relief. He said it was funny I asked because my grandfather's friend had committed suicide that night. Was found by his son in the living room. I was speechless. I didn't say anything about my dream because my dad's very judgy and quite skeptical. The whole dream aside, I thought it was so strange because I'm not close with his side of the family at all. I'd never met that man before. Don't know why I would have traveled there. Childhood Hatman. When I was a kid growing up in rural South Carolina, I lived in a very broken home. My grandfather raised me until I was old enough to start school. Then I went to live with my parents and brother, who were about a year older. My dad was a truck driver. My mom worked at a local truck stop. My parents were very abusive to each other. My brother and my mom was extra mean towards me. Anyways, there was this figure that stayed around the house that in the past year I've learned is the entity described as the Hatman. The Hatman would make itself seen during all hours of the day and night, both in the home and around the property. Anyone who spent any time around the home or had seen it, they've probably seen him. One night when my mother and her coworker friend got off from work, they decided to grab some food and hang out at the house, middle of the night. Mom's friend had her boyfriend tag along with them. The boyfriend saw the entity in the house and it scared him so bad he ran out and refused to enter the house again. And at one point my parents had a preacher come pray over the property, even though they weren't really religious people. But nothing changed. The strange thing is that I never was really afraid of the entity. I actually found comfort in knowing it was around and would get slightly excited when I would see it. My home life was really bad at the time. My parents beat each other routinely, and that's when they get along. They'd be pretty violent, my brother and I. Looking back, I wonder if things being so terrible was the reason I wasn't afraid. Figured it couldn't be much worse than my reality. We continued to see this entity. A few things happened, and they happened quickly, so I'm not really sure what the break was. We moved into another home across town. About the time we got moved in, my father got a DUI, resulting in him losing his truck driver's license and needing to change his life in a hurry to keep from losing everything. Right after he got his DUI, within 2 weeks, he and my mother went to church and changed their lives forever. Never went back to that old lifestyle. Dad eventually became a preacher years later. Never saw the entity again after the move. Door moved and freaked me out. So just thought I'd share what happened over the weekend. Saturday night I was watching my son. He's nonverbal and autistic. He has severe OCD related to his autism. He's 8 years old and very much a challenge every day. His mother had to work inventory at her job, which left her working that night, which isn't uncommon. Anyways, I'm laying in bed with my son huddled up close beside me. He's in the dark with a lot of things going on in my mind. Most prominently in my thoughts are memories of my grandfather, who I lived with as a child, raised me until I started school. After I started school, I went to live with my parents. I'd still stay with my grandpa every weekend. My grandfather passed away when I was 19. It was in a workplace accident at the age of 76. My grandfather used to tell me, "One day I'm going to tell you how you saved my life." And I'd just laugh it off as the idea of me saving his life wasn't being plausible. He was a mountain of a man. He served in the U.S. Navy in World War II as an underwater demolitions team member. He had stories that had Hollywood movies are made of him. And this time, well, he was a rough and tumble guy. After got out of the military and even served time in prison for safecracking back in the 50s. He didn't settle down really until I was born. 7 days after my birth, I went to live with him. He raised me in a home in the woods at the end of a mile-long dirt road. He was my hero. To think I'd ever saved his life was beyond comprehension. Fast forward to current times. Me raising my mentally disabled son, I struggle a lot. A lot of the time when I'm struggling with my son, I reflect on my grandfather raising me. I wasn't mentally disabled, but I was a challenge looking back. Some days I got beaten down and got pretty downtrodden and just wanted to check out for good. The only thing that's kept me around on some of the hardest days is knowing my son will need me in the future. As I laid in bed thinking about all this, my son got up and went to turn the hallway light on. He doesn't really like to sleep in absolute darkness. He got back in bed and huddled up close beside me. That's when I thought, maybe that's it. Maybe that's how I saved my grandfather's life, that he never really got to explain to me. Maybe he too at one point was at the end of his rope, and it was me that gave him the will to hang around. At that point, the closet to the bedroom door closed as if it was pushed shut by somebody. Freaked the hell out. I was waiting on the weight of all in my mind, and that's when this happened. I jumped up and searched for everything that could have caused it. It wasn't a soft closure. It was as if somebody pushed the door closed. Not slammed or angrily closed, but steadily and purposefully. Anyways, it took me about 30 minutes to chill out, including the crying. Not sure if he was sending a sign from beyond the grave or what. Definitely freaked me out. Why not? Makes sense to me. The time I almost died. I'm a fairly accident-prone person. So bad that I've broken toes so often that I can tell from the pain if it's broken or not. I'm so bad that on a football field of pavement in a parkway, there was a patch of ice that was no bigger than a softball. I somehow managed to slip on that, sprain my ankle. So this story about what happened to me was a true event. Shouldn't surprise anybody really about my almost death. It's actually kind of funny now, but it was so unfunny then. And in Canada, there's a popular tourist spot that's on the border of Canada and the US. It's called Niagara Falls. It's got beautiful waterfalls, plenty of gift shops, and hotels and motels and other activities. One summer, my mom and I went to stay there for the weekend as a vacation. Now, we were pretty poor. This was the first time we could afford a cheap hotel, gas and food, and some touristy stuff, all while being able to afford bills and food. So my mom looks up the cheapest hotels and resorts, restaurants, etc. We planned around that. She found a 2-bed hotel with a small bathroom and a mini fridge for about $100 a night, so she took it. When we got there, the clerk was nice, and when my mom and I were walking to her room, I saw 2 pools. An outdoor pool with around 10 dirty, originally white plastic lounge chairs and tables with faded umbrellas around them, and, well, the water was filthy. So I immediately decided that, I was against that. After my mom and I settled into the room, I told my mom I wanted to get into the pool. Well, that was in a separate building, with one set of white doors and the walls all windows, about 15 fabric lounge chairs, and the water was clean, but nobody else was there. There's no lifeguards, no other guests, no one. So I changed into my swimsuit and jogged over to it. Then I put my towel and covered clothes and got into the pool. At 12 years old, I was about 5 feet tall, so I could touch the bottom of most pools. Most pools are very, strict, I guess. They usually go on a very slow slope from the shallow to the deep end, just so you know where you're going. However, this pool did not. This pool dropped immediately to the deep end with no slope or warning. Well, my dear friendly reader, now might be a good time to tell you that even today, at almost 21 years of age, I can't swim. I'd like to float around, relax, hang out in pools, and as a kid, I'd like to see how far I could go without going to the deep. I was doing this and I found out that there was a drop. I took a huge gasp of surprise, which filled my lungs with water. I flailed around, trying my best to get to the ledge, still breathing in the water. I screamed for somebody to come and save me. Anyone. I remember seeing a young man who I'd guess was 20 at max across the building from the open door. Saw him look in my direction and walked off. It was at this moment I had resigned myself to dying in that pool. I was sad that my mom would most likely be the one to find me. I was scared about what impact it would have on her. I was worried about what dying would feel like. I was getting tired from the struggle. That's when I felt 2 large hands on my back and butt pushing me to the ledge. Pulled myself out weakly and my hands helping me out, and my hands rubbed and just pained my back as I coughed up water and tried to get my breath. I looked back to thank whoever was helping me, but there was no one. The hands were only really visible from the effect that they had on me, my coughing and the indentation of them. I laid there for a minute and whispered a thank you to whoever, or whatever saved me that day. Got up, grabbed my stuff, and weakly wobbled over to our hotel room. It's been 8 years since that day. Still don't know how to swim. I've definitely learned a few things from that experience. First of all, if a place where you can get hurt looks suspicious, get the hell out of there. Second, there's a difference between cheap and inexpensive hotels. People die in cheap hotels. They're not wrong. Odd experience with scent. My grandmother passed back in September. She was a great lady and, well, saying that she helped raise me, that's an understatement. When she passed, I inherited her favorite sewing machine. She was a tailor and a seamstress her whole life. It was one of her favorite possessions. It needed some TLC, but it was still very cool, and it was a 1930s model Singer. It was a beautiful cabinet. I ended up putting it in my living room and put it next to a small urn that was containing some of her ashes. I've had many friends talk about seeing or being visited by dead relatives in dreams and whatnot, but if they were particularly close in life especially. I don't generally believe in that, but was secretly hoping I'd hear something from her after she passed. Never happened, so I kind of forgot about it and moved on. So 3 or 4 weeks ago, my significant other and I were just talking in a cleaning living room. The conversation was pretty standard. Thought we were trying to decide on takeout or dinner. I walked over to dust the sewing machine and was hit with what I can only describe as a wall of scent. It was overpowering and extreme. It's like exactly how I remembered my grandmother and her house smelling my entire life. It only lasted a few seconds. It stopped me cold. So strong it was like she was standing right next to me. The sewing machine in her house, was there pretty much her whole life. But it's been in mine since September. I've been cleaning it regularly. It doesn't smell like her house anymore. I haven't smelled that scent again since. Not sure what caused it, but I'd like to think that it was her telling me that she was at peace or just saying hi. Either way, it may sound odd, but I miss the way that her house smelled. I'm grateful I got to experience it one more time. I know what you mean. The house on 16th Street. This house was the house that my mom grew up in. The woman who raised her owned it. She ended up renting it from her when she was 8. When I was 8. I was gonna say. We lived there until just before my 10th birthday. Anyway, this is a story, so let's get to it. First thing happened days after we moved in. We had a beautiful Persian cat that was given to us from a friend. This cat's name was Kiki. Kiki. He was an extremely obedient cat. He didn't like being on the furniture and absolutely hated being outside. We had him at the house for about 3 days before we never saw him again. We searched the house top to bottom. We looked in every single room, cabinet, and under every piece of furniture. We looked outside in bushes and trees. We scanned the alley behind the house and kept an eye on the road in front of the house for this boy. Well, he was just gone. There could be logical explanations, but about a week after living in that house, I started hearing things when I lied in bed. My brother and I had rooms on the 2nd floor. That was while my mother and her boyfriend were on the 1st floor. Every night as I tried to fall asleep, I could hear somebody walking up the stairs. Sometimes it sounded like running, sometimes it sounded like 2 people coming up them. I would also hear the floorboards of the hallways creak as if somebody were pacing across them. I always left my bedroom door open at night because I was too afraid to close it. I could see the hallway from my bed, and I would hear these footsteps, but never see anybody come into the hallway from the stairs. There was just never anybody there. The school that I went to was across the street from the house. So when I was in 2nd grade, I came home and noticed that I didn't see my mom's car in the driveway. Obviously, that meant that she wasn't home. I walked into the house and called for her a few times anyways, and, well, there's nothing. As I made my way through the house, I started to hear her voice. It sounded like she was having a phone conversation. It was coming from the basement. Called for her once more before making my way to the basement. The moment I placed my foot on the top stair, the talking stopped. I was scared, but I still went down to see if she was there, but she wasn't. There was no one in the house. I was the only one there. Ran up those stairs as fast as I could, straight out the front door. Waited on the front lawn for my mom to get home. She showed up about 15 minutes later and asked why I was sitting on the lawn with my jacket and backpack still on. I gave her some kind of an excuse. I didn't tell her what had happened because I didn't think she'd really believe me. I never left alone. Well, never felt alone, rather, in any part of that house. But the basement felt 10 times worse. It was a large basement and with 2 large rooms, but the first was paneled and carpeted. Had a very small closet-like room in it that was lined with shelves. The woman who raised my mom used to pickle beets and other vegetables and stored them in that room. The second room was the laundry room. It was large, just cement and rock. In the finished room, we had a TV and a futon, and my mom's boyfriend, weights and workout equipment, as well as his guitar collection all down there. The second summer that we were there, he bought a new guitar at a yard sale. He was hella geeked out about it and brought it to the basement as soon as he got home. Set it on a stand in the center of the room, went upstairs, called a friend. About 15 minutes later, we smelled the smoke. We noticed it come from the basement. They ran down there, and his new guitar was on fire. It was burning from the headstock and the top of the neck. Put the fire out and looked for a source, but there wasn't one. The guitar wasn't plugged in into any amp, and there was no walls or outlets, and it was in the center. We assessed the damage, and the guitar was ruined. The fire burned so hot that it burned through every cord, and the headstock was nearly charred. The last thing that happened in that house was the absolute worst. It was the same summer as the guitar fire. My cousin came over to spend the night. She never really slept over before, so we were super excited. It was when I went to bed that all hell broke loose. I had 2 single beds in my room in case I ever had somebody over, and, well, this was the first and last time. I was already asleep in my bed when I woke up with the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. I sat up and looked over at her, and she was crying and screaming, "Oh my God, did you see it? Did you see it? What was that? Oh my God." I was sleeping, so I didn't see anything. All I could say was, "What?" My mom and her boyfriend came running up the stairs into my room and asked what was going on. My cousin was fucking hysterical. She was so scared that she couldn't even move. My mom's boyfriend had to carry her downstairs the whole time. I could just hear her crying and saying, "What was that? Did you see it?" I was stunned. I was in complete terror. I just sat in my bed too afraid to move. After about an hour, my mom came up and just told me what my cousin was doing, that she was going home. I asked my mom what happened. She told me that everything was okay, not to worry about it. About a week later, I asked my mom. I asked her again. She told me something and it chilled me to my bone. She told me that my cousin told her that she heard somebody coming up the stairs. When they reached the top, it was just a big black thing, like a cloud almost. That when it got into the center of the hallway, it grew, filled the hallway and blocked out the light. I just looked at my mom, and I was so scared that I didn't have any words. She asked me if I'd ever seen anything like that in the house. I never saw, but I did tell her about the footsteps. To this day, I've never spoke to my cousin about it. She's never brought it up, and I'm too afraid to ask her about it. We moved out that autumn. Years later, I brought it all up to my mom. Told her everything that I experienced living there. I was nervous, but I just wanted to tell someone. She surprised me by telling me that she experienced the same things, and some even worse when she lived there as a kid. She told me that she once rolled a ball into a small, with a jarred pickled shit in it. She said that the ball stopped in the center of the room, that all the jars shattered and they sat on shelves. She also told me that the neighbors would often call the police and tell them that my uncle, who was a child at the time, was on the roof of it running around in his underwear. That's what they wrote. When the police got there, there was never anybody on the roof, and sometimes this would happen when no one was even home. She said that this was a pretty constant thing. All I know is whatever lives in that house never felt like a human spirit, didn't feel like an animal, didn't feel natural, felt menacing.